immunity in exchange for testifying about his Russian contacts.
Flynn wants a promise of legal protection before testifying about the Trump campaign and Russian meddling in the election.
Michael Flynn, who was ousted as President Trump's national security advisor, is now offering to testify if he is given immunity from prosecution.
And top Democratic leaders are wasting no time using the Flynn developments to fuel more rank speculation against President Trump.
I just wonder what the Russians have politically, personally, or financially on President Trump, because this is about a national security issue. Why would the President of the United States just come in and start to flirt with the idea of lifting sanctions on Russia in terms of their behavior in Eastern Europe? Why would the President of the United States question the START Treaty? Why would the question of the United States put Putin on a pedestal and diminish the greatness of America in that? There's something wrong with this picture.
Joining us now with reaction from Washington, Matt Schlapp, chairman of the American Conservative Union, along with former State Department official David Tafori. Matt, I'll start with you. It seems like if the press had been as aggressive covering this IRS scandal, I mean, they didn't do anything about that. I mean, you had Lois Lerner taking the Fifth, people taking plea deals, and they didn't really care at all. But all of a sudden, you know, Mike Flynn makes a phone call and, you know, all hell breaks loose. Why is all of a sudden everybody in Washington an investigative reporter?
Yeah. Well, this is something you're going to have to learn, Jesse, which is Republicans tend to be very careful and sheepish when it comes to going after Democrats for scandals and investigations, whereas Democrats, you know, I got to take my hat off to them. Every moment of every day, they try to make every Republican feel like they're a criminal. Think about this case. Mike Flynn is the victim. He was unmasked, and his identity was leaked to major news publications. And now it's the Democrats saying somehow that Mike Flynn is the one who is the person who has committed has broken the law. It's ironic how they turn everything on its head.
Well, there's no evidence so far to come out that he's broken any law. David, it seems to be funny that when Hillary's associates all got immunity deals, and that was fine. But Mike Flynn casually asked for an immunity deal, and all of a sudden the press brands him some criminal. Don't you see a little bit of a double standard there?
You know, this should not be a Democrat or Republican thing. This should be something that all Americans care about. You know, the framers of our Constitution were really worried about interference by foreign governments. That's why they put in the Constitution protections so that foreign governments couldn't interfere in our democracy. That's at base what happened here. Russia interfered in our election. Now, for Matt to say that Flynn is a victim is unbelievable. Flynn has said he wants immunity from prosecution, means he's suggesting that he's committed crimes and he wants immunity to give evidence to talk about other people who have engaged in crimes.
If he was,
that's why you ask for immunity.
No,
David,
it's not true.
If he was unmasked, then he was a victim. That's hard to argue against.
No.
Yes, you can't unmask someone. That's a criminal abuse of power.
Sorry, Jesse, you're incorrect. Let me explain. If you are unmasked because you were in conversations with someone who was properly surveilled, like an agent of the Russian government, which is what happened here, that is not improper. In fact, that's what the law requires. You unmask Americans who are caught up in conversations.
But we don't know if he was unmasked appropriately and he was leaked to the mainstream media.
Now, if it was leaked, if it was leaked, now that may be a problem. And if someone
if it was leaked, it was leaked. And Mike Flynn, let me explain something.
David, let Matt finish. Go ahead, Matt.
The reason he wants immunity, and I would want it if I were him as well, is because this is how he's been treated by our government. They've already committed unlawful acts against him, and he has a story to tell. In order to go to Congress, he no longer has a trust factor with those who will be asking him the questions. And I don't blame him for having that lack of trust, and I think the American people would like some fairness here.
David,
Matt, you're living in a fantasy world.
Let's address this.
Immunity because you've committed a crime and you want protection against being prosecuted. Now, if people leaked that information and that was classified information, we should go after them too. But we need to go after both the leakers and the people who were unmasked, who improperly and potentially engaged in treason against our country by dealing with the Russians in a way that hurts our country's interests.
David, hold on a second. There's no evidence there was treason, number one. Number two, there's more evidence that the Democratic Party's in cahoots with the media and these leakers than there's evidence that Trump was in cahoots with the Russians. It's all smoke, no fire, and we haven't gotten to the bottom of any of this, and the media doesn't care about the fact that there's potential abuse of power, that President Obama and holdover officials might have surveilled a president-elect and then illegally unmasked him and then leaked classified information to the press. To me, that seems like the juicier story. And instead of covering that, it's a process crime now about when the House Intelligence Committee went to the White House, when did he go, who let him in. The real story, to me, seems to be the abuse of power.
The story that American people care about is whether a foreign power engaged in interference in our democracy. That's the most important story, and that's the real threat to America.
David, how many votes did the Russians change on Election Day? How many votes did they change?
All Americans care about that,
Answer the question. David, how many votes did the Russians change on November 8th?
The point is that the Russians...
Zero. It's better. Let me jump in here for a second.
We don't know that. Obama intelligence officials said that in open testimony. I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, let me just say real fast, which is, if the Russians tried to influence our elections, which, by the way, I think they tried to.
What do you mean?
Let me tell you something.
17 intelligence agencies in America said they did.
Let me finish.
There's no if anymore, Matt. There's no if.
They try to influence and destabilize America every day of the calendar year. Do you know whose fault that is? That is President Obama's fault for leaving us vulnerable. Let's really focus on what these investigations should be on, and it's Obama's failure.
That's a good point. It all happened under Obama's watch. Guys, thank you very much. Next on the rundown, new questions over whether the Obama administration tried to undermine the Trump White House. We'll take a hard look at that in a moment. In the Impact segment tonight, undermining President Trump. Amid the chaos surrounding the Russia and wiretapping investigations, the White House is trying to highlight what the outgoing Obama administration may have done to undercut the Trump team.
I think that the revelations of Evelyn Farkas, who played a senior role in the Obama administration, going on the record to talk about how they politically used classified information, is troubling. Day by day, more and more we are seeing that the substance of what we've been talking about continues to move exactly in the direction that the president spoke about in terms of surveillance that occurred. And that should be very troubling.
For context, these are the remarks made by that Obama staffer earlier this month that Sean Spicer is referring to.
I had a fear that somehow that information would disappear with the senior people who left. So it would be hidden away in the bureaucracy, that the Trump folks, if they found out how we knew what we knew about the Trump staff's dealing with Russians, that they would try to compromise those sources and methods, meaning we would no longer have access to that intelligence. So I became very worried because not enough was coming out into the open, and I knew that there was more. We have very good intelligence on Russia. So then I had talked to some of my former colleagues, and I knew that they were trying to also help get information to the Hill.
A lot going on today.
Yeah. That's why you have the leaking.
But in an interview with the Daily Caller yesterday, Farkas said that her comments have been misconstrued, stating that she was not in possession of intelligence about Trump or his advisors, and she did not share any documents with Congress. Joining us now with a reaction from Richmond, Virginia, Fox News contributor Charlie Hurt, and from Little Rock, Arkansas, General Wesley Clark, the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. So, General Clark, boiling it down, what Farkas admitted to was that Obama intelligence officials gathered information about Trump and conversations that he was having, squirreled those intelligence nuggets away, hiding them from the Trump transition team, and then had people leak them, illegally leak them, because it was classified, to members of the media and Democrats on Capitol Hill. Does that bother you?
Well, honestly, I don't know what happened. I mean, I heard that statement. I saw stuff come out, But I also saw a lot of other things that confused me during that period. During that period, I saw President-elect Trump. It was as though he was already president. He was making statements. He was telling what he was going to do. He was trying to basically brush off the findings of the intelligence community that Russia had interfered in the election. I mean, that's what was stated. And so I just think it's one of those ugly periods in a transition of presidential administrations. I think we ought to move on and put it behind us and look into the future. I mean, President Trump has got some remarkable initiatives underway. Some of them are very promising. I'm really excited about the National Association of Manufacturers saying that their sentiment is much higher, that they're going to invest more and create new jobs. I know foreign countries are going to invest here. I think that's all great. But I do think it's incumbent upon the American people and the Congress and the executive branch and the Federal Bureau of Investigation to get to the bottom of Russia's interference in the election, because that's something that's unprecedented.
Yes.
Never happened before.
In a way.
And we need to know what happened, because
I
want
to know what happened too. And I think everybody wants to know what happened. But right now it looks like there's a lot of innuendo floating around. It's pretty irresponsible. And I would also agree that it was an ugly period, that transition, because you had former administration officials actively undermining a president-elect. Charlie, there seems to be more and more evidence piling up day after day that there was an aggressive campaign to undermine the president-elect. You've seen it in the New York Times. You've seen it by Farkas, this woman on MSNBC. The leaks that have come out. There's a mounting evidence that this is happening. At what point does it become, you know what, this is the story now, not so-called weird connections between Trump and Russia?
In the current media environment, I don't know that it ever that ever occurs. But it is truly amazing because, as we've pointed out, there are all of these unanswered questions. In fact, they haven't even been asked yet about the efforts to undermine the incoming the transition team and the incoming new president. If indeed, and there is evidence to suggest that it has happened, look, see Mike Flynn. If in fact that is what happened, all of this business about Russian connections, murky connections that, by the way, have been exhaustively researched and investigated for months now, we now know, none of that pales in comparison to the idea that you have the most powerful espionage assets of the United States government being used by an administration to spy on a political opponent before, during, and after that political opponent wins the presidency. That is like on the level of constitutional crisis. Right. Which I think is a big reason why we have seen so much sort of unusual activity with Devin Nunes going to the White House, going to the White House to see things, going to the White House to brief the president. It's because we've never been here before. And anybody who has seen movies like the Edward Snowden movie, about all the massive collection that goes on, anybody who has the slightest concern about that, they do care about this, and they care about that a whole lot more than they care about Russian connections, right, because this has to do with the integrity of our intelligence community and the ability of us to not be spied on by our own government.
It's not just about the integrity of the election, which we know now was not rigged in Trump's favor by the Russians. It's about the abuse of power potentially by an administration against an incoming administration. General, real quick, just to wrap this up, the motivation, do you think if indeed this did happen, is this just Obama officials caught by surprise at the Trump victory and trying to salvage his legacy, knowing they're shut out of power in the House, the Senate, and the White House? I mean, that's got to be the motivation if you were to speculate.
There are so many things that you and have covered here that it's really difficult to take it apart. But let's put it this way. First of all, the Russia connection has not been exhaustively investigated. Secondly, that would be a constitutional crisis if we had an election system that a foreign power could come in and influence effectively. That has not yet been exhaustively run down. Every transition has its rough spots, and every transition is different than the other. I remember in the 1980 transition, there were concerns that Ronald Reagan was undercutting the effort to get the hostages out of Iran. But here's what's different about this transition. President-elect Trump said he didn't trust the intelligence community. And so naturally,
well, I mean, General, would you trust the intelligence community if they were potentially unmasking your associates and then leaking things to the mainstream media? I wouldn't trust them.
First of all,
listen, General and Charlie.
The Washington Times has lived off the leaks from the intelligence community.
Okay, but so has the New York Times and so has the Washington Post. And that's why they don't care about these leaks, because they're making money off of them.
For the intelligence community.
I know.
So I believe in the men and women who serve our country.
I do too, but you have to admit,
get to the bottom of the Russian connection first.
Fishy going on. General Charlie, thank you very much.
I agree.
Up next,
but it's about Russia.
Up next, Attorney General Jeff Sessions tells the factor he will aggressively go after leakers. But how? That debate right after this. In the Unresolved Problems segment tonight, bringing leakers to justice. Last night on The Factor, Bill O'Reilly pressed Attorney General Jeff Sessions about the effort to hold leakers to account.
The leakers in the various agencies, federal agencies, you guys zeroing in on them? Do you think you're going to have some indictments shortly?
I expect that we'll get to the bottom of some of this. This is not right. We've never seen this kind of leaking. We've never seen, it's almost as if people think they have a right to violate the law, and this has got to end, and probably it will take some convictions to put an end to it.
Do you foresee indictment shortly?
Well, I won't predict that. I would just say that I take that very seriously.
Joining us now to analyze from Palm Springs, California, Rick Grinnell, former U.S. spokesman at the UN, and from Washington, Democratic strategist Richard Goodstein. Rick, I'm sick and tired of hearing the Trump administration vowing to go after leakers. They've been doing it since January, February. Now it's the end of March. When are they going to get a leaker and get an indictment and make an example out of someone? Because it's going to continue if it doesn't happen.
Yeah, look, we're in a crisis mode here. We have the intelligence community has been permeated by partisans on both sides. And let's be very honest, both sides are guilty. For a long time, they were leaking to the media to make the president look good, President Obama look good. Now the others are trying to leak to make President Trump look bad. We've got to stop this. This is serious, and I think what the Attorney General has to do is go after the supply, not the demand. And what I mean by that is go after the leakers who promised to hold intel close and not share it. When they do share it, they're breaking the law. We should not go after journalists. They are the ones who receive the information, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's their job. I wouldn't prosecute any journalists. And by the way, that means the media are not going to help us highlight the leakers. They're going to do everything they can to keep that supply coming. So it's really important that the government crack down, find the leakers, which they can easily do. Right. You can figure out who pulls up that intel, who prints it, who pushes it out. And they should find that out and prosecute that person and those individuals to the fullest extent of the law immediately.
I'm glad that you don't want to throw journalists in jail. That warms my heart. Richard, don't you think that the Obama people are setting a very dangerous precedent here, that in transitions of power, which are supposed to be peaceful, if you're leaving behind antagonistic holdovers and people willing to break the law and leak classified information to undermine a president-elect, I mean, it was one thing for Clinton people to rip a W off a keyboard in 2001, but this is serious stuff. Don't you agree?
Jesse, the Trump campaign had leak problems. His speech at the Republican convention was leaked out. You think that was Obama holdovers? There was problem. Look, anybody who's
what speech was leaked out beforehand? I think they release excerpts to the media beforehand so we could tease it up.
To your viewers, Google Trump campaign and leaks, and you'll see what I'm talking about. It's not just something that they put out voluntarily, okay?
Okay.
The fact of the matter is that Trump could have fired every single, quote, holdover that he wanted. And I will say this. This whole focus on leaks is the single biggest misdirection in American
back it up. Let me
politics.
just address what you just said. No, Richard, you said something. I want to just address it. You're saying that President Trump knows who's leaking and is refusing to fire them? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying this leak investigation talk is the single biggest misdirection ever, because what we have on one hand is 17 intelligence agencies saying the Russians subverted U.S. democracy. You had Trump himself.
That's not what they said. How did they subvert the democracy? Did any vote change? No.
No, no, listen, if it didn't matter, why would Donald Trump 100 times on the stump say how he loved WikiLeaks? Julian Assange was reviled.
Because it was juicy, and everybody loved hearing about Chelsea not getting along with everybody.
No, listen,
Rick, let me ask you a quick question, because we're kind of tight for time. The Democrats have no power, the House, the Senate, the White House. It's all Republican now. It seems to me that these leakers are now teaming up with the press. They're the official Democratic Party opposition now.
Yeah, look, I think it's a big problem. I want to go back to the point, though, that anyone who leaks is breaking the law. And Richard should not minimize that, mock that, or ridicule that. That is a breaking of the law. You may benefit as a Democrat for some of these leaks, but it is a slippery slope when the Republicans then take over the intel agencies and then suddenly they start leaking. I want to stop all of these leaks.
You don't think the average FBI agent is a Republican? Excuse me, look, the fact is these leakers hear the President of the United States.
Wait a second. After Comey didn't indict Hillary for obvious transgressions, who knows what the party affiliations are of the FBI agents? But listen, guys, we got to pay some bills. We'll get you back next time. Thank you very much.
See ya.
Coming up, President Trump going after the House Freedom Caucus. How will the heavy-handed approach impact his agenda? Right back with it. In the personal story segment tonight, President Trump versus the House Freedom Caucus. The president is now threatening to fight the group that helped sink the Republican health care bill last week. And he's promising to take on its members in the 2018 midterms. But the Freedom Caucus and its allies are not backing down.
The Freedom Caucus is doing what's best for America. They're very principled and honorable men. And I think that we're trying to also let Republicans know that if we pass something bad, if insurance rates are going up at 20, 25% a year from now, after Republicans have taken ownership of health care, that won't be good for the party.
Some conservative political observers don't think the president's battle with the caucus is good for the party either.
I think it is really, really unhelpful to Donald Trump's ultimate agenda to slam the very people who are going to be propping up his border wall, all the things he wants to do on immigration, on trade.
Joining us now to analyze from Washington, to weigh in, Lena Epstein, former co-chair for the Trump campaign in Michigan, along with Republican strategist Rena Shah. So, Rena, conservative principles, I guess, let Obamacare live.
Oh, come on. You guess. Obamacare has to live on right now because there was no thoughtful, nicely well-done approach to dismantling it. This was hard and fast. It was going to be rammed down the throats of the representatives. And you know what? Frankly, it was the best thing that Paul Ryan did to cancel that vote.
So you believe that keeping Obamacare in place is a positive thing, even though if it's going to happen, for the next year or possibly two?
For now it is, because there hasn't been a proper approach to really fixing the issues. Middle-class families have suffered under Obamacare. I get it. I know so. They've seen rising premiums. We have so much to tackle, but it can't be done in the middle of the night, and it can't be done so fast with ultimatums issued from the White House.
No, I understand. And, Lena, when you talk about blame to go around, it's not just the Freedom Caucus that booted this thing. The White House messed it up. Paul Ryan messed it up. They didn't have a bill that satisfied everybody, and they rushed it through, and they had to pull it because it wasn't ready. Everybody shares the blame, not just the Freedom Caucus here, correct?
I couldn't disagree more. I think that good rhetoric does not always translate into good policy. And a lot of the folks in the Freedom Caucus along the campaign trail made promises to their constituents that didn't have a legislative path when it comes to health care. That's not President Trump's fault. I think he did a very brave and courageous thing by postponing the bill, but I think in the end, we will be judged as a party, as conservatives, on our ability to come together. There is no such thing, Rena, as perfection in this system. It is highly, highly imperfect. We have Americans with very, very differing needs when it comes to health care. It's going to be messy.
Thoughtful and methodical
We are going to have to come together, and I stand behind President Trump and his efforts to do so.
Rena, let me ask you a quick question. So these Freedom Caucus people are in pretty safe conservative districts. If Trump is now going to target them and say, you know, we're going to get behind a primary opponent, if the primary opponent then runs against this Freedom Caucus guy saying, my opponent allowed Obamacare to live, do you think that's going to be effective, yes or no?
Look, I mean, the reality is, how are they going to, first of all, find primary challengers that are more conservative of these people already? I mean, this is about 40 people in the House right now. They range from people like Mark Sanford in South Carolina to Mo Brooks over down south. We see Southern members, right? But there are moderates who hated what was going on with this HCA as well. This is uniformly disliked. 17% of Americans, and we've heard the stat over and over, did not like this American Health Care Act. So thoughtful and methodical is the key here, and I think the American people get that. The president attacking these people does nothing for him. It's unwise.
Well, maybe it was a good thing for this bill to go down because only 70% of the country liked it. I'm not sure if we're ever going to get another shot at it, though. So
and in the end,
hindsight's 2020.
Nobody will get elected. Nobody will get elected in a conservative position without a solid health care reform.
That's true. And the death spiral is now upon us, so we can just watch it go down the toilet. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Directly ahead on this special edition of the O'Reilly Factor, the battle with sanctuary cities. Can the Trump administration force them to pay a real price for defying immigration law? Stay tuned.
The O'Reilly Factor, the #1 cable news show for 16 years and counting.
Thank you for staying with us for this very special edition of the O'Reilly Factor, America Divided. I'm Jesse Waters in for Bill O'Reilly. And in the Factor follow-up segment tonight, punishing sanctuary cities. Last night on the Factor, Bill O'Reilly explained why he thinks is what's going to come down for jurisdictions defying the federal government.
To make sanctuary cities comply with federal law, the Trump administration will now withhold money from them in the form of Justice Department grants. That means cities like Seattle, which receive millions of dollars to beef up local law enforcement and institute safety programs, may no longer get that money, which is why Seattle is suing. Whole thing's a giant mess and reflects the huge division in this country. Will sanctuary cities be forced to comply? Doubtful, but they will pay a price.
The Trump administration isn't alone in taking a hard line on sanctuary cities. Texas Governor Greg Abbott is preparing one of the harshest crackdowns in the country.
We've been pushing a piece of legislation in Texas that is going to pass, that I will be signing into law, that imposes even sterner penalties on counties. It will include things such as further defunding them. It will impose fines, and it could impose jail time for the sheriffs to enforce the laws. Oddly enough, these sheriffs could wind up behind the very bars they are releasing these criminals from.
Joining us now from Washington with reaction, Alfonso Aguilar, the president of the Latino Partnership for Conservative, and from Los Angeles, radio talk show host Ethan Bierman. So Ethan, if the job of the sheriff is to keep people in jail, and then the sheriff releases people from jail, isn't that basically aiding and abetting a prison escape?
Well, I mean, if he's releasing them when he doesn't have proper dispensation to do so, such as somebody hasn't served their time or whatever else. But the sheriff does not have to do the job of ICE. And it's actually very funny to listen to conservatives on this one because it was their very own beloved Justice Antonin Scalia who wrote the majority opinion in 1997 in Prince v. United States that says the federal government in no way can force sheriffs to do the work of the federal government.
But that's not what is happening in Texas. The governor, a state official, is telling a local official what to do. The feds don't have anything to do with that, so that analogy is bogus. Alfonso, if the law enforcement community was refusing to enforce laws on abortion or guns or drugs, there'd be a huge uproar, don't you think?
No, I think so. And look, this issue is being politicized. This is common sense. I agree with President Trump and Governor Abbott. What they're trying to do, what they're trying to tell local law enforcement is if they detain somebody who has a serious criminal record or who's engaging in serious criminal activity, they should refer him to federal authorities. Why would anyone be against that? I don't know. I mean, look what happened to Kate Stanley. This guy had a serious criminal record. He was a felon, and the San Francisco Police Department refused to hand over this individual to federal authorities. That's ridiculous. So I believe that we have to be very strong. We want to get criminals out, and I don't know why would anyone would oppose that.
Yeah, Ethan, why do you oppose keeping criminal illegal aliens in prison?
I don't. And actually, you're completely misrepresenting exactly what happened with the Kate Stanley case. That isn't what happened. They didn't refuse to keep him in prison. They released him when the court ordered them to release him.
No, that's not what happened.
I disagree with.
ICE tried to slap a detainer on them and keep him there so they could then detain him and issue deportation proceedings, and they defied that order and let him out. That's what happened in San Francisco, and that's why Kate Stanley is dead.
Opinion, they don't have to listen to the federal government. They don't have to do the federal government's job.
That has nothing to do with what the Scalia's opinion is about. This is something that's happening in Texas, exactly, and if Greg Abbott wants to crack down on sheriffs that aren't cooperating and letting illegals out, there's nothing illegal about that.
But Ethan is not answering the question. Why don't you want local police, state police, to refer individuals with serious criminal records to federal authorities? What is the problem with that? Why is this such a big issue? We should be united on this issue. I just don't understand why it's such an issue for you.
Yeah, Ethan, 15 seconds, last word. Go ahead.
I don't have an issue with referring violent criminals to federal authorities for deportation, but that's not generally what is going on. We have very specific individual examples that we're talking about, but overall, you're talking about different things. Greg Abbott, of course, has control over sheriffs.
If Kate Stanley was your daughter, I think you'd have a different opinion about sanctuary cities. Guys, we got to run. And a quick reminder, don't forget to pick up a copy of Bill's new book, Old School, Life in the Sane Lane. It's already become a #1 bestseller and is available online and in bookstores now. Also, check out the new Contributing Factor podcast with Robert Samuel. Bill O'Reilly himself is the guest for a lively discussion about the book. The podcast is available on BillO'Reilly.com or iTunes. And when we come back, drama engulfing the investigations into possible ties between Russia and the Trump campaign. Back in the book segment tonight, the biggest story of the week. There were quite a few to choose from. Last week, we asked Bob Cusack of the Hill newspaper and Aaron McPike of the Independent Journal-Review to make their predictions. They are back tonight, joining us from Washington. Aaron, let's start with you. What did you predict? And what did you think the biggest story was going to be?
Well, I predicted that it would be the investigations from the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, and I think I was right about that. I think everything that happened with Devin Nunes, oh, you're clapping, thank you. I mean, I can't even keep straight what happened last week versus what happened this week at this point, because so much is happening every single day. I think Mike Flynn, obviously, last night, that report that from the Wall Street Journal, that he was going to seek immunity to testify, was maybe going to overtake Nunes, but it's all part of the same story, and who knows what's going to come out next week. But that certainly took up so much of the oxygen this week, every single day at the White House briefing, and really topped all the newscasts this past week.
I'm surprised Trump didn't tweet something out that was just totally off the reservation to throw everybody off that storyline. Bob, what did you predict, and were you right or not?
Surprisingly, I'm going to say I was right. I predicted there would be fallout from the lack of passing the Obamacare bill last week, and the party would be divided. And here speaking of tweeting, President Trump tweeting at the Freedom Caucus, there's all this tension. We don't know what they're going to do next. A lot of drama. I agree with Aaron that the Intel story was big, but now it's the agenda, what goes on. It's a show.
So you believe that it's now the agenda has ground to a halt, and you think that was the biggest story this week, the Obamacare fallout? Because every time I turned on the TV, it was about this intelligence fiasco. You know, it's funny that it's now become a process story, and the press is so concerned about the integrity of this investigation. I do remember when the State Department investigated the Benghazi scandal, and they never even interviewed Hillary Clinton. And that investigation was supposed to be, you know, the most perfect investigation of all time. But now, all of a sudden, Nunes is, you know, he's a bad guy. Right. It doesn't seem to be completely honest what's going on in the press corps.
Well, I mean, I think some of the coverage of the intel situation has been overkill. I mean, I do think that, but this intel world, we don't know really what's going on. That's why these investigations are ongoing, and the FBI doesn't actually, when they're interviewing people, they don't record it, which I found very odd when the FBI interviewed Hillary Clinton in 2016. So I think sometimes you can't trust what you're watching on television.
Except when you watch The Factor.
Of course, of course.
Aaron, quickly, right now, every time I look at the news, it's, you know, where did Nunes go? Did he go to the White House? Who let him into the White House? What did he see at the White House? Who at the White House? What does that mean? Why do we care?
Well, look, that is something that Sean Spicer was trying to get into today, that the dates don't matter and the process doesn't matter and who let him in doesn't matter. It's the substance. But we don't know what the substance at this point even is. I think that is a big deal, too, that right now you have the White House saying that the incidental collection of these other names and the unmasking of those names is a bigger story than Russia potentially tampering with the election. So we're not even getting into the substance of those two stories because we are so focused on these process stories. I will say, to Bob's point,
yeah.
Healthcare coming off the agenda is a big story because also the Russia investigation is taking over everything on the agenda. They can't get to tax reform as quickly as they'd like. They can't get to infrastructure.
I feel like I'm living in Moscow every time I turn on the television. Guys, stick around. So when we return after a quick break, we want us to talk about what's going to happen next week, and they're going to make some predictions. Washington. So let's preview the big week ahead. What do you see, Aaron, is the big story next week?
I think without a doubt it is Chinese President Xi Jinping visiting President Trump at Mar-a-Lago. And part of the reason for that is because it is so unclear what the administration's messaging and strategy toward China is. And I say that in part because you see President Trump taking swats at China on his Twitter feed once a week, whereas when Rex Tillerson visited China 2 weeks ago, he talked about a relationship based on mutual respect and cooperation. Yeah. And when I talked to him, he really wants to have a very friendly, cordial relationship with China and turn them from a rival into an ally. But I don't think that's what we're hearing from Donald Trump, so who knows how this visit's going to go.
Aaron, what do you think Trump is going to serve Xi Jinping for dinner at Mar-a-Lago?
I have no idea, Jesse.
No idea?
Please tell me if you know.
I'm wondering myself, do you think they're going to play golf for down there? What are they going to do?
Well, he sure does like to play golf, doesn't he? So maybe he'll try that. He did play golf when he went to Mar-a-Lago and hosted Shinzo Abe. So maybe he'll try to do the same.
You know, excellent pronunciation. Bob, what do you see the new big story next week as?
I think there's so many leaks about the intel and Russia, and also this big question about Michael Flynn. Will he be granted immunity? I think that's going to be the big story heading into next week because, and the question of can Devin Nunes survive? Every day there seems to be a new revelation that's leaked that doesn't look good for him. So I think that's a big question. Mostly Republicans are backing Nunes, except Walter Jones, congressman from North Carolina. He says he's not on Nunes' side, but for the most part, the GOP is standing behind him, and that means he probably will survive unless something new comes out.
Why can't he just say, no, I'm not going to step down? I mean, no one's forcing him to step down.
No, yeah, and you can't unless the speaker applies political pressure. I think the Republicans are just getting a little nervous how much attention this is getting, and they want to focus on policy, and it's very difficult to do so right now.
Well, Republicans in Capitol Hill usually do cave to pressure, either from Democrats or the media. So I will predict that Nunes is probably going to have to step down because these guys never stand tall when stuff hits the fan. But I do want to pitch to O'Reilly doing a Waters World down in Mar-a-Lago because I want to be there to cover the Xi Jinping summit and report on what they're doing, what they're eating. And I'm very fascinated with that Mar-a-Lago diplomacy. What do you think is going to come out of that real quickly, Aaron?
Honestly, Sean Spicer was asked today, why hasn't Donald Trump labeled China a currency manipulator? as he planned to do right after taking office. And Sean said, well, you know, I really don't have anything to tell you on that. It's two months already.
Yeah, you know what he's going to say? He's going to say, Xi Jinping, you are a currency manipulator. Now let's go tee off. Aaron, Bob, thank you. Before we go, a quick reminder to watch an all-new Waters World tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern right here on FNC. Bill O'Reilly stops everything he's doing just to watch it on Saturdays, so you should too. And that is it for us tonight. Thank you for watching this special edition of The Factor, America Divided. I'm Jesse Waters, in for Bill O'Reilly, who will be back Monday. And always remember, I'm Waters, and this is my world.
Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. The left is on the attack this evening. Across the country, they're demanding that immigration law no longer apply in schools, hospitals, or churches. Meanwhile, a college student was punished by a professor for using the M word, mankind. We've got a lot on